and welcome to this week's edition of Think Big. I'm your host, Akia Garnett. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got a great conversation lined up for today. I am joined by three trailblazers, and they have done and are doing some amazing things in their career. On the panel with me is Gloria Parker, who is the CEO for Parker Group Consulting, and she's the former CIO for the Department of Housing and Urban Development and also for the Department of Education. I'm also joined by Joyce Hunter, and she is the CEO for Vulcan Enterprises. She's also the former Deputy CIO for Policy and Planning with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And you may remember our third panelist, who is Linda Cureton. She is the CEO of, and remind me again, of Muse Technologies, and she's the former CIO for NASA. Thank you all so much for joining me and for joining us this week on Think Big. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome. Just to refresh our audience, Linda, tell us again about Muse Technologies.
So Muse is an IT consulting company. We specialize in IT transformation, enterprise architecture, project planning, strategic planning. We also have a line of business in leadership development and soft skills training, which supports organizations that want to help their people resources come along with the transformation.
Great. And Joyce, what about Vulcan Enterprises?
Vulcan Enterprises is a team of people who are strategic doers and social entrepreneurs. We do management consulting, strategic management planning and delivery, other management consulting, business development support, as well as contractor and vendor management relationships.
And Gloria, what about Parker Group Consulting?
Sounds like we do a lot of the same kinds of things. Parker Group Consulting does what I like to call IT management and governance kinds of things like strategic planning, enterprise architecture, capital planning, consulting. We also consult on management, change management, organizational change, and we consult with industry on their strategies for marketing to the federal government. And lastly, we've recently started a new practice based on our experience in training both government and industry, government on management development and industry on sales.
Right. How did you all find yourselves at the helm of information technology for a federal agency? Who'd like to take that first?
Well, I was a political appointee, and so I have been in IT for approximately 25, 30 years. And so I came at this, I don't have a degree in technology. My degrees are in sociology and an MBA in marketing. And so I came at this by virtue of just applying for positions where they felt that a generalist could articulate the IT and business strategic vision.
Okay, all right. And Gloria?
Mine was kind of interesting. I majored in math and mathematical statistics. Back when I came out of school, we didn't have computer science degrees. They were just starting. So IBM came searching for people with more analytical backgrounds, and I started my career with IBM. And I won't go into all that depth, but eventually one of the folks that had worked under me in IBM had become a White House fellow and eventually a political appointee in government. And he called and asked me to come take care of IT people, which I told him I didn't want to do, so I came and did it. And I said I'll only stay 2 years, and it was so fulfilling that I ended up staying 10 years in 2 agencies.
Wow, that's just great. I can't wait to dig deeper into the actual roles that you all played at each of the agencies. And Linda, tell us again how you found yourself at the helm. And I know you have such an elaborate and wonderful story in your career and how you were at NASA twice, right?
So I started in IT as a punishment. It was a punishment. Two areas where I was punished. I went to Howard University, and I was majoring in mathematics and Latin. And I had no intention of learning anything about computers, but I couldn't graduate because the counselor decided that I had to have computer class in order to graduate. So I reluctantly took a computer class and I found out I liked it. I also had a kind of a summer internship job as a student assistant cartographer, a map maker for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And back then they used pen and ink to draw their nautical charts. And being left-handed, my hand would smear the ink on the charts and I would ruin the charts. And so finally they got sick of me ruining charts and said, go work on the computers. Nobody else wants to do that anyway.
Right.
So I ended up in computers grudgingly. And on career day at Howard over there in the gym, I didn't want to find a job because I wanted to keep going to school and get my PhD in mathematics. So I went into the gymnasium, and right in the middle of the gymnasium were the ends, which was NASA. So I got into the line for NASA, and they were looking for mathematicians who were good scholars, who had IBM assembly language, which I had, and Fortran 77, which I had.
Tell us about that. What is Fortran 77?
What is Fortran 77? So it's a programming language that's like equations.
Yes.
Like writing equations out in a form that the computer understands.
Okay.
So it was created for mathematicians or engineers who want to do things like flight, orbit, and attitude determination, which is what was going on at NASA at the time. And I worked my first job out of college as a GS7 mathematician, was on the IBM mainframe, which was the IBM 36095, a hybrid. And if you remember from that movie, Hidden Figures, it was the mainframe that came in. So I was working on the supercomputing computer of its day.
Awesome. Joyce, what was your number one assignment at the
It was so diverse.
Department of Agriculture.
Department of Agriculture is made up of 27 agencies and staff offices and mission areas. And so there were a number of things that took precedence in when capital planning is one thing, and making sure that the health of the applications, or what I call investments, which are the applications and the software systems that the agencies use in order to fulfill their missions. And so capital planning is one. Standing up the FITARA office, which is the Federal Information Technology Acquisition and Reform Act. That was something that we had to stand up. And the open data initiative that President Obama had an executive order on. So we had to do those kinds of things. So a lot of my job in policy and planning was to ensure that all of the executive orders or directives from the White House were executed on. And I think the biggest challenge with federal government is execution. We can come up with all the great ideas and we can come up with, great initiatives, but unless you actually execute and you can get people, I call it the coalition of the willing, because a lot of times, a lot of these things do not come with money.
Right.
So you have to encourage people and engage people, and I think that that's where my sociology and marketing skills come into play, because I don't have a technical background, but that never stopped me before.
When you looked at it and you said 47 different agencies it's made up of, did you scratch your head and say, "Wow, this is huge"?
Oh yeah, 27 agencies is huge.
Or 27.
27 agencies, and it's approximately $3.6 billion for IT investments. So it's a very large and big responsibility in order to ensure that we have the coordination, collaboration, and communication between the CIOs. And we had a CIO council where we got together on a regular basis in order to discuss things of importance to the agency.
Right. And what would you say, Gloria, was your number one task as soon as you were hired?
Mine was interesting because I'm the first CIO at the Department of Education and the first CIO at the Department of HUD. That meant that there was no office of the CIO. So 26 federal agencies, or 24, we were the first CIOs, and we had to build all of that. So things like what Joyce just mentioned, capital planning and enterprise architecture, and some of those kinds of policies and procedures were not in place. So my first role was to put that office in place, which is huge in a federal agency, because they're used to doing things the way they've always done them.
Right.
And all of a sudden, we're coming in with discipline and with governance and all of these new policies and how money is now not going to be spent in a closet, but we're bringing it all together and making corporate decisions or enterprise decisions on how technology dollars are going to be spent. And I was responsible for putting all that in place. And so what I had to do was put those offices in place, make sure that I had the right people coming into those offices who could help implement all of that. And so building that office from the ground up. And I also had to make sure that what we were doing lined up with what the cabinet secretary was trying to get done with the mission of the department, and that everybody could understand how IT, the new IT, fit in. So it was an interesting undertaking. I had a great time doing it. We didn't have a book written on it.
I was going to ask you, did you have any examples out there of what this should look like, even if it weren't in the federal government or in that particular agency?
Well, what happened, like you just heard Joyce mention FATARA, which was a law that was passed eventually, which tried to, again, make sure that CIOs and the CIO organizations had more control over IT decisions and spending, etc. But there was no book written on all of this, and we had to build it. Now, there was a law, she dealt with FATARA, which came later, but there was a law that was passed, which was the IT Reform Act, and that was the one that established the Office of the CIO. So in the law itself, I used to read that law, I carried around, I tell everybody what was in the law and why we had to do this. It's the law. It talked about how we had to govern the money, how we had to govern projects, how we had to do all those things in IT. And but my experience from IBM helped me to soar in that area, because I ended up, with the experience I had gained from IBM, I ended up trying to help teach the other new CIOs how to do the same thing. And then I would always build a policy shop, get those policies and procedures in place, and then I would bring the IT operations organization into that. So,
I mean, how diverse is the infrastructure of IT for HUD? What are the various reasons why, and what types of IT operations are going on?
Oh.
You know, on the outside, people see HUD, they see housing and urban development, they see all the outputs of HUD, but may not understand how this is working on the inside infrastructure-wise.
Well, if you think about infrastructure, the whole infrastructure, the CIO's office runs the entire infrastructure at HUD and at education. Those are centralized agencies. So they're not just policy shops where the CIO sits. These are the shops that run all of the technology for the department. It's national, so it spans all of the regional offices and everything. And all those regional people report to that CIO. So it includes your data centers, all your networking, all your telecommunications stuff, all your desktops and laptops, and everything associated with IT, information technology, fits in that infrastructure. So when you hear about the mission, though, and you hear about what HUD does, for example, as a mission, think about how IT contributes to that mission. I was speaking this morning to a group of folks about business acumen, and the point I was making is you've got to, as IT leaders, you've got to understand how you fit, what your role is in ensuring that the mission is carried forward. So when people think of IT, they think about, oh, that's that computer stuff. That's all those data centers. That's all those wires running and schematics. Well, that's the operational component, and that's what's happening in the background. But somebody is making sure that all that stuff that happens in the background that nobody sees, wants to know much about, they don't care about as long as it's on and running, that those things that IT produces are in fact moving the mission forward, and that is contributing to ensuring that the mission is being carried out by the organization.
Oh, great. And Joyce, I'm sure for most people when they think of Department of Agriculture, they think of agrarian and farm life
they
and
think of Beverly
food and
Hillbillies and
right.
green.
I wasn't going to say that exactly, but I'm glad that you did. But what is the IT infrastructure like at Department of Agriculture, and what exactly does IT enable federal workers to do there?
Well, as I said, Department of Agriculture consists of 27 agencies and mission areas. Part of agriculture, and I'll just run down a few of them and what they do. Food Nutrition Service, for example, are the ones who administer the school lunch program, school breakfast program, and ensure that the states get the funds necessary in order for those programs to be enabled. In fact, if you look at USDA and all of the loan programs and grant programs that they have, we would be the 6th largest bank in the world because of the number of loans and things that we give out. So food nutrition is one. Forest Service, a lot of people don't think of agriculture in the Forest Service. But if you hear about a lot of those wildfires out in the West or in the Midwest, we have firefighters that go out and deal with those issues itself. And I like to say that you can always determine what National Park Service and Forest Service, because National Park Service is Yogi Bear and Forest Service is Smokey Bear. So that's the difference between the two. Then you have Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, which is critical because all the plants and animals that come into the country, they are responsible for ensuring that they are safe and available to be dispersed throughout the United States. So they have a program called that enables them to certify animals. People want to bring their animals back into the country, but they have to go through a process of certification and authorization. And prior to IT being in the mix, it used to take 6 to 9 months to certify these animals. And these poor animals, are sequestered away from their families and away from, people that they know. And so this new program will enable them to get through the certification process in 2 weeks. And then there's Food Safety Inspection Service.
Yeah.
So that inspects all of the meat and chicken and all the things that you see the USDA stamp on. So technology is a part of every single mission.
Wow. And Linda, you were here and we talked a lot about what led you to being at NASA and some of the challenges that you overcame while you were in that role. And I'm going to ask you if you feel that you were adequately prepared for the role when you stepped into it.
Well, I think so, and I've got to look down at the end of the table.
Because she used to come talk
Yeah.
to me.
And when did you all meet anyway?
She actually, Linda picked up the phone one day and called my office and said, I need for you to mentor me. And my secretary said, you don't have time to mentor anybody. I said, oh, yes, I do. You give her an appointment to come in and see me, and we've been friends ever since.
I didn't know what a CIO did. I really didn't. I did not know. It was my first senior executive job, and I was associate CIO. I was a data center girl. I was a systems programmer. I knew hexadecimal. I knew IBM assembly language. I could shift bits, logical.
I mean, but granted, many people didn't know what a CIO was, right? And what a CIO did.
Well, I was a CIO, and I didn't know. And then I was one, and I didn't know. And so I read a couple of books and everything. And so one thing that Gloria failed to say is that she was the first African-American female cabinet-level CIO. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Yep. And so there was nobody else, no one else that looked like me. And I was at Department of Energy at the time, and Gloria was at HUD, which was right there at L'Enfant Plaza.
Right.
And so it was a little short walk, a little block. And she so graciously had me come in, and I think I cried when I left. Because what had happened, it was my first executive job. It was the first time I was really close to political appointees. I didn't know what that was like. And I didn't know what the CIO job was like, and she said, "Girl, let me tell you, this is what you got to do." And she got me through that. She told me about her story about getting through the Y2K issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got that story. And then I realized I didn't know what I had done, and I just dealt with it. I stayed in touch with Gloria, you know, shared my problems with her, and she shared her wisdom with me, and we've been doing that ever since. And then sort of when we found out, oh, somebody else, you know, the new girl on the block. It's like, come on, get in here. So we just wanted to help each other.
Right. Well, you know, I still have my plastic from Y2K. I had that all on my windows, and nothing happened. So
I have a funny story about people. A funny story about people not knowing what
yes,
a CIO
Joyce, it's a good
is.
thing.
One day, some person in HUD who was in a mission area, I don't even know what their job was. I think I found out back then. But the CIO was new, and they were hearing that there was a CIO, Chief Information Officer. And so all of a sudden one day my phone is jumping off the hook. It's just ringing all day, and my secretaries are going crazy. The phone is going crazy, and all these people keep calling saying that they want to know about this program and they want this information about this thing or that thing or whatever. And so we started trying to track it and figure out where they were getting our number from. So we asked a couple of them, how did you get this number? And they said, well, when we called the person who we normally call or we would call, their voicemail says, if you're looking for this kind of information, call this person. If you're looking for that, call this. If you're looking for that, call this. For all other information, call the Chief Information Officer. Oh, that was a riot. We were like, how you shut that down? So.
Yeah, I mean, and were you adequately prepared for that role that you were in?
For the Chief Information Officer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have to say that coming out of IBM was also a unique situation. IBM trains their folks extremely well. And having been a systems engineer in the early stages at IBM, and also through my career at IBM, I became one of the executives in IBM, and I dealt with executives in industry all the time. And so I learned along the way all of the things I needed to bring that into government, and that's basically what we were doing.
Right, and the leadership part of it. You know, it's not just
absolutely.
understanding your job and understanding infrastructure, but it's also leading a herd, you know, leading a group of professionals who sometimes had been there much longer, you know, and had their own career track and had, you know, things that they wanted to do, but you certainly had a mission to accomplish. How about leadership for you, and were you prepared for that?
Absolutely. I think every single job that I had along my career prepared me for going into the role of Deputy CIO for Policy and Planning. As I said, a lot of what I did had to work around developing a coalition of the willing and getting people to work collaboratively together. And that's what I did prior to going to Department of Agriculture.
Joyce, you recently led a group of youth
Yes.
through a STEAM camp.
Yes, yeah.
Stay right here. We'll be right back, but you can take a look at this video that Joyce has shared with us, and it is about a camp that she most recently led.
As part of her job with the USDA, Joyce Hunter often attended meetings focused on using open data from the government to solve problems related to food and agriculture. But she noticed a distinct lack of women or young people at those meetings. She was told there just weren't many who were interested.
Well, I thought to myself, well, they're not looking in the right places. And maybe we ought to encourage youth of different cultures and colors in order to ensure that the pipeline is filled for the future. So I went to my CIO and asked her if it would be okay if we set up a open data camp for youth. Particularly underserved youth.
By partnering with the Governance Lab at New York University and other agencies, Hunter organized summer camps for youth to experience science, technology, engineering, agriculture, and math, or STEAM. This summer, she brought the STEAM camp concept to Sacramento. For 2 weeks, nearly 24 high school students went on field trips and engaged in STEAM-based activities.
And so one of the things I love about it is the kids are so curious and they're coming up with their own research questions, with their own challenges. They're asking questions about why agriculture is important to them, why food is important to them.
And I chose the water and drought group because as a Californian, we know that California was most recently in a drought, and I wanted to see what this data camp could teach me about water and how it affects agriculture and other topics.
And they're traveling all over. They went to different places like Russell Ranch. They saw the drones, were really excited about it. They saw the UC Davis Laboratory and the UCANR researchers. They saw helicopters. They saw these big machines that have 35 cameras that do 3D dimensional pictures of crops and what's out there. And they've also went to the cannery and they loved hugging the chickens. They thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
The California Open Data STEAM Summer Camp was made possible through a partnership between the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, USDA, and the Governance Lab. As part of her job with the U.S.
Welcome back. You've been watching Think Big. I'm your host, Akia Garnett, and I'm joined by 3 former CIOs for federal government agencies. And we've been having a great conversation about what it takes, to actually be in that type of role, whether or not you were prepared for that type of role, and what that role entailed. And we just watched the video, Joyce, that you shared with us regarding a camp that you most recently ran. How was that?
It was fantastic. I started the camp at USDA. It was called the USDA Open Data STEAM Science, Technology, Engineering, Agriculture, and Math Summer Camp for Youth. My purpose was to bring underserved youth into the area of data, to be able to use design thinking in order to, because coding is great. Right. No doubt, coding has a place, and a lot of people are going to coding camps. But once you do the codes, what do you do with the data? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be able to provide a instrument or a vehicle for youth to come in, take a look at the data, analyze the data, figure out whether it's useful information, and how to use that information in order to do presentations on that data. Right. And so we had great success the 2 years that I ran it at Department of Agriculture. And then when I left in January of 2017, one of the senior vice presidents who used to be at USDA called me up and said, hey, I think we'd like to try and do that program out here in Sacramento. And so we put together a program, and we just finished the 2 weeks.
Oh, that must be very fulfilling.
It was. One of the young ladies that came to USDA at first, in the first iteration of the summer camp in 2015, decided that she took an interest. Introduced her to a lot of the scientists within USDA. She decided upon graduation that she was going to become an entomologist of bugs. So she likes bugs. That's okay. But she was a good student. She talked to a lot of people. We teach them how to do research. So she did her research. She got a full scholarship to Florida A&M. However, she turned it down because she wanted to be a scientist. And upon doing her research, she found that Bryn Mawr University graduates the highest number of female scientists in the United States. So she got a full ride to Bryn Mawr University.
Wow.
So we have had 10% of the students coming from inner city areas deciding after they come to our camps to major in data science, or agriculture science.
That's awesome.
And Gloria, what do you think about today's younger workforce and what they need in order to be prepared for managing and overseeing the federal infrastructure of IT in the future?
I think one of the things that our young folks need to do, first of all, is appreciate technology and science and technology. And I do a lot of work as well with STEM and trying to give them a whole rounded view of what it's all about, so that they can really appreciate and enjoy it, robotics, everything, so they get a whole picture. But then once they decide that that's the path they want to move in, I think that to be successful, they really always have to understand how the work that they do in technology impacts whatever is there, they're there to support. That's one of the areas where a lot of technology people fall short. They don't really, all they think about is their technology world and what's in that world. And technology for the sake of technology is not that important. What is that technology going to do? What will it deliver to ensure that what is there to support is moving forward, that mission piece is moving forward. So there has to be business acumen. They got to understand the business and understand what the needs are in the business. Then they have to be able to understand how technology supports that. And they have to be able to speak both languages. And that's so important because when they walk into a room with people from the business side of the house and they want to grow, they want to move up the ladder, but they can't communicate with the people in the powerful mission organizations, then they get cast out because they can't communicate. So learn what the mission is, learn how you support that, learn how to speak both languages, and you can speak your language to the technology people when you are talking to them, but when you turn around and you're talking to the mission people, you have to speak their languages and their business acumen. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of young people miss. I think it's so important for them to enjoy it, but they also have to understand that vision for how it impacts all of us in the future is something that they have to truly understand and promote.
And Linda, one of the things Gloria mentioned was that our younger professionals need to appreciate technology. The fact that this particular generation that's coming up was born with a cell phone in one hand and a tablet and whatever else, and now we're moving toward artificial intelligence. I mean, it just never stops. Do you think that's helping them or hurting them when it comes to running an actual infrastructure?
Well, I would say that it makes the CIO's job a little bit more challenging because now anybody with one of these on their wrist, they're a data center manager. Because you've got a lot of data, a lot of information at your fingertips, and so access to information, ease of use of technology, makes it easier to use. And so the concept of managing IT is like, what does that mean? Why do you have to manage it? It's just easy to do, and so it makes it so that the CIO really focuses on other things. I think what the point that Gloria was making is about getting to the mission side of IT, not just about the bits and bytes and the technology or the things that's on your wrist, but is it really serving the mission? Is it serving the people that are supposed to be served? One of the jobs, I would say, little gigs that prepared me for being a CIO was to be the president of the information technology ministry at church. Now, that's like, oh, that's so cute. My mother would say, that's so cute. But it was hard. It was one of the hardest CIO jobs that I ever had.
And why was that?
Well, if you can convince a bunch of old Baptist deacons to invest in technology, you can convince O&D, right? That's right.
That was your testing ground there.
I had to explain why. We had to get some money and buy Windows for the PCs. People donated PCs, but we had to get copies of Windows so we could have licensed copies. And so, why do you have to do that? Just here's a copy. Take a copy. Why can't you do that? Thou shalt not steal. And so explaining things where it's like, oh, okay. So I learned how to speak the language, and in the example of church, this what Gloria was talking about is the demand side of the CIO versus the supply side. In church, it's not about butts and seats; it's about souls in heaven, and how does IT help you get to heaven? And now you start.
Right, Gloria, Linda, you start preaching. Good.
So
Keep it going.
And so you focus on things like not how many computers are in the lab and things like that, how many versions of Windows operating systems do you have? We had a little Y2K problem that we had to deal with. But, it's about, getting Bible study software available to enable a tutoring ministry to help keep kids off the street and get them into the church and help them with their homework, which has supported that. As a tutor, I tutored everything. I tutored French. I didn't even know French. But whatever it took to bring souls to Christ through technology, that was the mission of the IT ministry.
Wow, that's just great. And most churches that I've ever been a member of have very outdated, dilapidated technology equipment. It's just bad. So were you working with
agencies too?
Well, this is true. So you weren't working with a creme de la creme of equipment, right?
Some of it was donated, so it was hit and miss.
Well, I give you a round of applause. There's just so much that comes to mind when it comes to young professionals. And one of the things that, Gloria, you were also talking about is communication and being able to communicate on both sides. That business side, having the business acumen, but also having your own subject matter expertise. How often did you find yourself presenting when you were in your role?
All the time.
All the time.
Every day.
Every day.
Every single day, because you're having to share a new initiative, get somebody to, collaborate and pool their money for an enterprise-wide system. So it's every single day, whether you're either briefing the secretary, you're briefing your peers at the other agencies, and also you're briefing the career folks who are actually working and implementing on the mission.
Right, and so your communication skills when it comes to speaking,
Absolutely.
Writing,
Yes.
all of those things were critical for your roles.
Yes.
But it was very important, again, to speak their language. I remember when I was at the Department of Education and they were getting ready to cut my budget a few $100 million. And I was asked, I know we got a short period of time, but let me just say this real quick. I was asked to give a presentation to the senior management team to tell them what the impact would be. And when it was my turn to speak, because I was the, quote, IT kind of person, everybody got up and left the room except for like 3 poor little people who got stuck and they couldn't get out the room. And so I went ahead and did my presentation. And I didn't talk about what I couldn't buy. I didn't talk about what hardware I couldn't get, what software I couldn't get, any of that. I told them what they would not be able to do. And talked about the return on the investment, what we could do if they invested, and what they could do, what they could do with their mission. When they came back, they called for another meeting because they told them, you guys should have heard that. They called a special meeting. It was standing room only, and we ended up not only not getting our budget cut, but we got more money to try to help move the mission forward because I spoke their language and helped them understand what would happen negative, what impact would be on them, what the negative impact would be to them, not to me.
Right.
Well, I had a success actually doing the opposite. That I would not advise kids don't do this at home, but I did this and it worked. And I was trying to persuade. I needed money for IT security. I was hired to fix the security problems. And so the first thing I had to do was beg for money. I mean, literally beg for money. I said, wait a minute, you hired me to come do this. I've got to beg you to give me money to do that. Okay, I got it. And so I had my little justification, my little return on investment, all the kind of stuff, data, statistics, metrics, and it meant nothing. They said no. And so we had to do multiple rounds because there were several security initiatives. And so by the time I came to maybe the third time, I uttered these words. I said, blah, 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 blah. Thank you. And so everybody laughed, and they said no, right? And so it came back around. I said, blah, 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 blah. No. Third time, they're like, this is not funny. I said, so I just want to let you guys know that you hired me to come here and fix this problem. If it's okay with you, it's okay with me. And if there are no words that I can give you to persuade you for you to have me do what you wanted me to do, then it doesn't matter what I say. blah, 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 blah. I got my money. I got my money.
When it comes to the mission, though, and in many organizations, you have people who support the critical functions in the organization, and then you have the knowledge-based folks who are sort of mission deep, if you will. How important was the mission of the agencies that you supported when you were working there? Were you sold out for the mission in addition to your own technical capabilities?
Well, I think you become partners with the mission owners.
Oh, yeah.
You
Definitely.
absolutely are. You understand. The first thing that I did when I came to USDA is I went around and met with each and every CIO for each and every component agency.
Yeah.
Understood what they did, how they did it, why they did it that way, if there were any challenges, and what, I just met with them to find out exactly how I could work along with them as a partner. Mm-hmm. And that was critically important to enabling us to be able to move their mission forward. Because as Gloria said, we're the intel inside, if you will. Right. We keep their missions going. We keep the needle moving forward. We serve their constituents and their people out in the field. And so it is incumbent upon us to really understand and know exactly what each of them does so that we can be better partners with them. Right. And delivering services. And
Gloria, for the people who worked for you, what kind of leader would they say you were?
My people loved me. They would say that I was fair, that I was a true leader, and that I was a visionary, and that they really could get behind me because I was the one that came with the vision. And I used to tell them in our meetings all the time, we are going to be number one. HUD was at the bottom of the list. We were always at the bottom, rock bottom. When OMB would rank all the agencies, we could always count on being the last one on the list. And I told them, I said, we're going to implement these offices and we're going to be number one.
Right.
And we just kept watching our number go up, and eventually we were in the top 5. In some areas we were the number one agency, and others we were at least in the top 5, and they were so excited. And so it was the whole visionary thing and being able, and I also gave them the authority to do what they needed to do. If they needed help and they wanted my advice, they wanted me to sit down and walk them through how to do things, I did that. They wanted me to leave them alone, and they figured it out. I left them alone. I didn't punish them if they got something wrong, particularly when they were taking risk and we were creating new things, if they took the risk and tried to figure it out. So. And when I go in those agencies today, they say, "Can you come back?"
So,
that's the difference between leadership and management. Mm-hmm. You let the leadership is being able to delegate, being able to sit back and watch and advise and encourage and enlighten. Right. Management is, you're in there trying to tell them what to do. That's not ever a good idea.
Right. If you were talking right now to a person, a young professional who's saying, I think I have the chops to be the next CIO, or to be in a C-level position in the federal government agency, what would you say is the number one characteristic they need to have in order to succeed?
Leadership
skills. They got to have
relationships, leadership,
all of that,
communication, soft skills.
Yes,
all the soft skills.
I would say that
soft skills.
Technical skills get you to the table. Soft skills is what makes you successful.
Absolutely.
Dan Goleman, that wrote Emotional Intelligence, one of the statistics in his books, it says that soft skills is the skill that differentiates the very top performers in their field.
That's true.
So if you're a technician and you're very good at IBM assembly language or hexadecimal, that's fine. But if you can work with people, if you can bring people together and find solutions, then that skill is the skill that helps propel you to the top, no matter what field you're in. The ability to get along with people, to understand, to have empathy, to be able to resolve conflicts, to communicate, to understand. Those things are the keys to success.
And all of that is critical. And if I had to rank 2 at the top, I would say being a visionary and communicating well.
And that
across
verbal
the
and
board.
the written and verbal communication. And what would you say, Joyce?
Communication, collaboration, and coordination, the 3 C's.
Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that each of you were very organized and very structured in your days. No.
You start out structured.
About 5 minutes.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, you're
There you go.
structured.
Yes.
By 5 o'clock, you have no idea what happened to the structure.
Exactly.
So what you do is you go get the best secretaries, administrators that you can get who can keep you in line, because your day just gets ripped apart by 9 o'clock. So,
So when a crisis hits, some major something crashes, or maybe there's a hacking or someone trying to anyways, how do you respond to that in your role? Were you prepared for that kind of thing?
You know who to go to. For example, when there was the major incident over at OPM, and so we had to put together a communications team. So the chief privacy officer reported to me, and so she actually worked with the communications office and OMB to figure out how to put out a communications brief for the employees. So you have these SWAT teams. You know who to go to. You put those teams together, and then they know how to execute on getting information out.
Hindsight is always 20/20, but if you could do anything differently, would you?
I would say no.
Yeah.
Even the mistakes that I made, I think that I'm a product of the mistakes that I made. Had I not made mistakes, I would not have learned. I think that we all, long for, if I, had no regrets. I have no regrets, because even the things that I would regret, I'm glad they happened, because had they not happened, I wouldn't be here. I won't say the agency, but I had the job from HELL, which was just extremely stressful. I had no support. It was just a mess every day. Every day was worse than the day before. It was just like that. And I look back at that experience, and I realized that had I not had that experience, I wouldn't be where I am today, because I learned resilience, grit. I learned how to be prepared, and how to pay more attention to detail. It's like, I gotta always cover my behind. Well, I learned I'm supposed to do that. I'm supposed to dot my I's and cross my T's. So it taught me a lot. Even though I suffered, it was a very good suffering, because I got to be a better woman and a better CIO.
And one of the key things, you have got to bring the best people to the table. Your chain is no stronger than your weakest link. So if you go out and hire weak people, then your chain can be broken. I had a person one time to say to me, wait a minute, you just hired her and she's really smart. I don't think you really want to do that. She's really smart. The point was, they were trying to say to me, you don't hire somebody who might be smarter than you and can, quote, show you up. I never worried about that, somebody coming in and showing me up, because I knew what I had to do. But IBM always taught us, always hire people smarter than you. So like Joyce said, if I had a crisis going on, I knew exactly who to go to. And I stayed in my lane, did my job as the executive, and they did their jobs, and I depended on them for their knowledge, and that's why they were there. So
I had the absolute best people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Capital planning, enterprise architecture, policy, FOIA. The absolute best and the hardest workers.
Right. I want to thank each of you for being here and for sharing your background, sharing all the things that you were able to do in your careers, and you guys are still at it. You're still CEOs. You're still running the show. And we will have you back to talk about what you're doing in your actual businesses today and how you're changing the world. But again, I just thank you for being here. And I thank you for tuning in this week to this episode of Think Big. We will see you next time.